Hi, and welcome to the Drawing Inspiration Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hendley. Episode 5, Drawing Rainbows. It's time to talk colored pencils. Before we get into the main show content, there have been a few updates since the last episode. I continue to really enjoy seeing all your work on Instagram. That's where I get a lot of my inspiration, is seeing what everyone's putting together and sharing. And please continue doing that. I love seeing that artwork. And this leads to a funny thing that happened this week on Instagram. Obviously, in following people, you have access to their stories, and seeing those are also very fun. So one of the users I followed, they had an interesting story where they had posted a series of what looked like watercolor samples. And I thought, this is fantastic. So I liked it. And then I realized a little bit later, it wasn't watercolor. It was a number of nail color options. And in my embarrassment, I reached out to the user just to identify that, no, you know what? I love color, but I honestly thought, this was watercolor. So I haven't painted my nails in years. And so that was a little bit embarrassing, but it leads into our main show content, which I'll talk about in a bit, focusing on colored pencils. So I updated my iPad to iPadOS 13. The first public beta came out last week, and that's based on developer beta 2. I think it was a little bit forced. I think they should probably waited till the next beta, because there's quite a few bugs in this, and it doesn't mean it's not functional, but it really gets in the way of kind of using your device, whether it's iPad or iPhone. I would say now, and I will remind everyone at the end of this, do not upgrade your device. I do this for a number of reasons. One is I'm a geek and love trying out new things. And I also want to know what's coming, and as a developer, what we can be ready for and what we can deploy and what we do. And so I did upgrade to iPadOS 13. I would say it's beautiful. I do enjoy the interface, the changes they've made. I'm not going to go through all the details, but all that to say that, one of the highlights was this pencil responsiveness increase. I'm not really noticing that right now, but I haven't played with Procreate a whole lot. I've been focused more on physical media, graphite, and colored pencil recently. I did play a little bit, and I'm not seeing that increase. It's fine. I just haven't spent enough time with it. It may not be fully rolled out, but I'm not really seeing the change, I think, from 20 to 9 milliseconds. And I've been a little bit nervous using Procreate. Procreate's fantastic, and I'm not faulting them on this. This is a beta operating system. And so I've had a few issues with Procreate in exports not working, having challenges and kind of backing up to the Files app. And I think that's all leaning on the Files app just being in beta. And I've had Procreate freeze a few times. And so I would just caution everyone, do not install iOS 13, whether it's iPadOS 13 on your iPad or iOS 13 on your phone, if that is your primary device. And please be careful in doing that. If you've got an older iPad and you just want to play with it, that's great. Maybe decouple it from your iCloud. So, there's nothing that could damage your photos or your content in iCloud. So using a separate iCloud account is always helpful in that way. But I've been playing with it. I like it. I'm hopeful that maybe once we get to beta, maybe 3 or beta 4, that things will be a bit more stable. I'm encouraged. I'm excited, actually, about iPadOS 13 when it finally gets released at some point in September. And I'm going to be sharing my thoughts as I continue using the betas right in through that point in time. So Procreate has started something they call a weekly artmash. It uses the hashtag artmash with no spaces, ARTMASH. And what they're doing is they're identifying a series of 3 items, 3 prompts every week, and they're trying to inspire people to kind of put these together in their works and hopefully roll it into one piece. But it's something I think I'm going to try this week. So this is the first week of July, and the 3 prompts for this week are palace, a cup of coffee, and frog. And so I think I may do something with that. I'm excited that Procreate has done this. I like the idea of prompts. I'll be talking in a future episode about Inktober, which is a prompt for each day in October. So I'm really encouraged that Procreate is doing this. I think the idea of throwing out these terms gets people kind of thinking outside of their comfort zone. And even for myself, the idea of doing a palace, a cup of coffee and a frog, is far outside of what I normally do. Maybe not the frogs so much, but I'm right now focused on things like flowers and butterflies. So I'm going to take this as a challenge, and I'll post on Instagram when I'm finished, just so you can see what I'm doing. And I'll probably do the same maybe the second week. We'll see what words come out from that. And in the next episode, I'll give you an update as to how that went and what's going on with all of that. So the next update is around not letting old technology go so quickly. I have an old iPad Air 2 in the house, and my daughter was quite anxious in using my iPad Pro to draw. And so what I thought I'd do is take that iPad Air 2 and see if I can leverage that technology, which is quite old at this point, to use Procreate. And so the disadvantage with this version of the iPad is obviously there's no pencil. So what I did is I went out and found a bamboo fineline Bluetooth pencil. This charges with USB, it's wireless, and it works with the iPad. And it happened to be half price, so that was fantastic. And so it was quite easy to pair. You pair it with the Procreate app itself, not within iOS. And this is an iPad running iOS 12. And fired up Procreate because I have a copy of it. I installed it there as well. And now my daughter is thoroughly enjoying the idea of drawing on an iPad. Now, it's not as responsive as the Apple Pencil, but for someone who wants to draw on an iPad, this is fantastic. And so I would encourage you, if you've got an older iPad, investigate the idea of this pencil working. I'll include a link to this pencil in the show notes. And give it a shot. I think it is an opportunity for kids to be able to explore this if they want to build their own stickers or do some work for school or do a thank you card or Happy Mother's, Happy Father's Day kind of thing. It's a really great way to get into drawing digitally. So I would encourage you to see if you can leverage that, or if you know someone who's not using an iPad Air 2, just talk to them nicely and see if you can get that into your house for either yourself or someone in the house to start playing with digital drawing. So I did have an opportunity to do a couple of digital works this week. I did a red poppy in Procreate, and then I did a second white one. The white one I actually did via kind of a live draw on Instagram. So I spent about 40 minutes, I think, on Instagram drawing that. And that was fun. It was great to, I would encourage you to follow me on Instagram so that you can get notification of the next time I do a live draw. I think I'll be doing a few more of those. I still plan to do some on YouTube with 2 or 3 cameras, but for a quick kind of draw, I'm going to probably doing a few more on Instagram. I'm going to do some more digital, and I'm going to do some graphite and colored pencils as well. Now, the thing I did differently with these poppies is instead of using airbrush brushes within Procreate, I used something from called Sargent's brushes, and it gives kind of a wet paint effect. And I really like that. It was very quick. I was trying to keep away from the detail. I'll post a link to those. But they're not expensive, and I think they really do kind of reflect this idea of kind of wet paint and the way that you can move the colors around. It's, and I don't know how many brushes there were. I think there was, I'm going to say like 20, and it's fun. It's nice to be able to kind of move outside of that. Being digital, it's far easier than going out and buying some new materials. You can just install these new brushes and start playing away. So I did do that, and I'll probably do a few more pieces. And maybe I'll even use them for the artmash, so we'll have to see what happens with that. So I've also been doing more graphite, as per usual. Graphite's my first love. So I drew one rabbit. I thought that was great. I added another couple. My theory around, or my theme for this piece was that the older bunny was kind of reflecting on its life and looking out at the younger bunnies playing. And I like to tell these stories. I think it may actually turn into something bigger in the future, but I won't say much about that now. So I encourage you to try and do the same as well, where drawing is a nice way to take what's in your mind or what you see through your eyes and transpose that onto paper. It's always a bit of a challenge to turn that into some kind of story or some kind of narrative. I would encourage you to explore that if you can, because I think that we want to hear those stories. We want to see those stories. And so if you have some of those, even if it's just a frame or two into what you think was happening before and after that piece that you're drawing, keep that in mind. Try and leave those clues behind so we can explore that and see, I see something just happened before or after this because there's a remnant or there's something that looks like it's there's something happening. There's something that could happen next because of certain elements in the way they're laid out in the drawing. So, in a future episode, we're going to talk about composition, and that's not just simply placing the objects in a scene in a way that pulls your eyes through that. I think it's also about telling a story, trying to lead you to understand where everything. How everything got to where it is in that composition at that point in time, and maybe what's next, what's coming. Is something going to fall? Is a mouse going to get caught? Is it going to rain? Is someone going to trip? This kind of stuff is that gets a little bit more of an active sense to that piece that you're drawing. I've also drawn some flowers, and so sitting on the front step, looking out and drawing echinacea, milkweed, and lamb's ear, being able to try and play with these textures a little bit. I combine them just simply in a little small sketchbook that I've been using, and that's been fun. It's I'm doing it more because I want to explore those textures. Obviously, these objects don't move, so being able to draw them in real time is always fun. And trying to kind of keep the shadows out of it. I'm not really playing with the light as much, and it was good because the day I was drawing these, there were so many clouds, the light was in and out, so being able to track those shadows was a bit of a challenge. But I'm going to get out and do some more of this, and once again, I'm going to have a whole episode about sketching outside and some of the tools I use and ways to be effective in that space. So as I explore it myself, I'm going to share some of those tips and tricks with you as well. So let's talk colored pencils. I remember in high school being so excited in that first week or two, or even in preparation for that, going back to school and going out and buying those new Laurentian pencil crayons. I remember they were small sets. Initially, it was, I think, maybe 12, and then it was 36, and then 48. There were the massive kind of pencil crayon sets. I never really used them all, but just having that and a really good compass set was fantastic. And so I want to talk today about some of the colored pencils that I have used, and just my experience with those. I've been playing with them in the last week or two with a couple of pieces. And just kind of talk you through that. If you have not explored colored pencils, then this may be an opportunity to do so. I'm going to talk first, I think, about the types of pencils. Usually come down to like a wax-based or an oil-based pencil. I have Prismacolor Premier, which is a wax-based pencil, and I also have Faber Castell Polychromos, which is an oil-based pencil. And there are differences, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the pencil I haven't used is Caran Luminance, which is a very expensive pencil. I may mention it once or twice again, but I have not used these pencils. But some of the best artists that I've seen, they used the Caran. And I'm not encouraging you necessarily to go out and buy them, but I'm anxious at some point to be able to get these myself and be able to get a sense of the feel. And I'll talk about the differences in the pencils in a minute. What I would focus on is if you're going to look at any one of these pencil sets, whether it's Prismacolor or Faber-Castell, is to go out and buy a small set, like maybe buy 24, or even if you want, buy, individually, you can buy them, 10, 12 pencils, whatever the case. But I would encourage you to get a set because that way you've got a nice range. You will not have all the pencils you want. I went and bought a new set of Faber-Castell Polychromos, and I was missing probably 6 colors that I needed to do a piece I was working on. So be prepared for the fact that you may, even with a 24-piece pencil set, that you may not have all the colors that you need. And even though you can mix them slightly, I needed some very distinct greens and purples that weren't in that set. Having played with the Prismacolor, so I have Prismacolor, they're just kind of regular Prismacolor. These are quite old. And I also have Prismacolor Premier. So I started with the Prismacolor. They were good. I have lots of colors. I think I may have 120 pencils. So I've got a wide selection of colors. The problem I was having, though, is the leads kept breaking. And they're encased in wood, but they're not kind of bonded to the wood. So they do break very often. The leads will just fall out. And I'm not talking, large pieces, but there's breakage often. And so I found that very frustrating. I also found that when I sharpened them, I couldn't get the tip kind of sharp enough. It would always break off. It would splinter. And so while I was having some success, I couldn't get that kind of level of detail I was looking for. So then I realized I had Prismacolor Premier colored pencils. And I only had a few, but they were enough that I could actually try them side by side. And I didn't have all the colors, so that was frustrating again. But I noticed that with the Premier, I could get a much sharper point. It's not as soft a pencil, but I found I was able to get a much, much sharper point. And so I was able to get in and do that detail work that I needed. So I was quite pleased with that. Having read online about the Faber Castell, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go out and buy a set. And luckily, there was I was able to find a coupon. It was 50% off at Michael's up here in Canada. And so I went out and bought a set. And then I went to a local art store and I bought another, I think 12. And these are fantastic. So the Faber Castell Polychromos, the leads are actually bonded to the wood and you can sharpen them very fine points. So I'm able to do that kind of detail work that I need. These are oil-based pencils. The challenge with the wax-based pencil, so like a Prismacolor pencil, is that you don't have the... You get this thing called bloom. And so when you're working with wax, you end up getting kind of this bloom, this cloudiness that appears. And there's ways to eliminate it. So if you apply fixative, that helps to bring that down a little bit and protects it. But bloom's always an issue. And the other challenge with colored pencils is how light fast they are. And so this is their resistance to fading. And wax pencils, depending on the color, can be quite poor. And so the color drops off quite quickly over time. And when you move to things like a Faber Castell oil-based pencil or the Caran dash, you're going to get much more resilience as a matter of fading. I mean, the fixative helps that to some degree, but if you're concerned about fading over time, you want to make sure that you protect that and use the right pencils when you can. If you're just sketching, like I'm doing with the Prismacolors, it really doesn't matter which pencil you have, but if you're working on a serious piece, be mindful of that. And I would also recommend that when you're done your piece, that you transpose it digitally or capture it. So I would recommend taking a photo or scanning it, and we'll talk about that in a future episode about ways that you can move those physical pieces into the digital realm so that you can use them for accessories, and also being able just to preserve that point in time so that you can reprint it and share it with others. So as a matter of paper with colored pencil, I think anything that you use with graphite would be fine. I tried a Strathmore Toned Tan paper, which has a little bit more tooth than I'm used to using with graphite. It was interesting. I'm still working on a piece on that. I think that extra tooth provides a little bit more texture. I'm not sold on it, but I'm trying to work on it and see how far I can go with this piece that I'm working on. I'm still continuing to use Bristol Smooth. I bought some new stuff, 100-pound Bristol Smooth that I'm anxious to try as well. So the Bristol Smooth has some tooth, but not a lot. So it's enough to be able to hold that pencil, that colored pencil, but still not provide all those kind of white spaces that you see where you can't get that pencil into. It's much smoother that way. It allows you to work the textures, the colors. And so I'm still going to continue using the Bristol Smooth. That is my favorite paper at this point. Once again, every time I'm in an art store, I'm going to buy another pad and try it out. So at this point, Bristol Smooth is my go-to. And as I said, I'm going to try this new Bristol, which is 100-pound. It's a yellow pad XL. And I'm going to give that a shot. I'll provide a link in the show notes for that too. So when you're planning a colored pencil piece, the first choice is getting that paper sorted out. And so you can go with just a simple white. You could go with a tan, which is the piece I ended up working on. You can go to black or a different color altogether, depending on the piece and how you want that to stand out from your paper. For example, you may go to a tanned color because you're doing a cowboy, let's say, and you want to have that kind of vintage look to it. And so the other thing too, as I mentioned, is to consider the tooth and how rough that paper is. More tooth means that it's able to hold that colored pencil, wax or oil-based much better. But then you've got so many little holes in that paper that you've got to fill with material so that blue that you're putting in is a solid blue and not speckled with white or whatever color is that of the paper. And this is once again why I prefer using a Bristol Smooth. So once you have your paper sorted out, the next thing to consider is the sketch. I tend to use a 2H or a 2B graphite pencil, very light, very faint, just to get that perspective sorted out, get a sense of dimension and proportions, and just so I can barely see it, and then I start laying on the colored pencil. And then when you start with colored pencil, you're always looking at preserving those white areas. And that is, of course, if you are using a white paper. For example, the piece that I've been hinting at here is an iris flower that I've been working on. And I chose to do that on a tanned Strathmore paper. And I thought it would be just an interesting contrast. So I'm still working on that. I'll post a link to the work in progress. It's a challenge to this piece because there are no whites. It is a brown or a tanned paper. And so any white that is there, I have to inject. So I have to make sure that I preserve that area for those whites. And I have to add them and I have to work around them. So there's water droplets. There's whites as part of the flower itself. So getting those whites down and identifying those areas is the first thing you want to be able to do. If you're doing a colored pencil drawing on white paper, then making sure to outline those white areas and protect them. If you're doing eyes, making sure to protect that reflection that's in the eye, because you can't easily add that in later, and there's ways to get around that. We'll talk about that. And so I tend to go through and think about where are my whites and protect those, and then start focusing on adding the layers. When I add colored pencil, you're not pushing too hard. You don't want to break that paper because then you won't be able to add anything else on top of that. And so being gentle, going through layers, adding different colors on top of one another, being mindful that if you add 2 or 3 layers of brown and then you try and come in with a white, it may look really weird. It is possible to kind of soften the colors that way, but you may end up getting something happening, especially if you're using a wax pencil. It'll look kind of almost cloudy. And so this takes practice. I would recommend just focusing on, if you're going to do, let's say, grapes, for example, sitting on a counter, I would focus on drawing 1 or 2 grapes and getting those purples sorted out. And the other big challenge too with colored pencils is making sure that when you identify that color set, either write them down. Every colored pencil has a number on the side that you can use for reference, or just separate those pencils, those 3, 4, 10 pencils you're going to use from the rest of your pencils so that you know what you're leading to. Because if you keep putting them back in the same case, you won't remember where they are and which purple you're using and that kind of thing. And having a little bit of a scratch piece to the side is always helpful too, to be able to scratch and confirm, that the green that you have in your hand at this point is the same green that's on that flower at this point in time. And so having that little scratch piece of paper of the same color and the same quality is always helpful too. So what some people do to get an area, let's say a background sorted out, instead of using colored pencil for all of it, and they'll do multiple layers, they'll bring in like a thinner. So you take a paintbrush with some thinner. There's some odorless thinner that you can use and apply that to the paper, and that helps. And you can spread and distribute that kind of oil-based pencil throughout. And I haven't tried that. I'm going to in the future, I think. I'm trying to work on kind of the materials I have at this point, so I'm going to explore that in the future. I've never used thinners with colored pencil, so I can't really comment on it, except to say that some people do it. There are some fantastic YouTube videos on how to do that. I haven't explored it. I'm trying to focus more on the drawing components, so I don't want to get too much into that. So one of the things that some people will do, let's say you're in a scenario where you're drawing a human eye, and you want to be able to add those really strong reflections in the eye, 2 or 3 little squares or whatever the case. What some people will use is something called a jelly pen, which is white, and they will apply that in afterwards. And once you apply it, you can remove a little bit of the material and you can actually color on top of it. Once again, this is something I have not tried. I've always kind of protected those areas and drawn around them so that I'm applying the colored pencil around instead of trying to add the white later. And similar to drawing with graphite, where you're trying to protect that. I mean, you can use an eraser to kind of remove that material, but it's really hard to do that. And so I would recommend, back to my point earlier, when you're drawing those white areas, preserve them. Make sure that no pencil appears there. Because you've got to be able to have that stand out when you're applying those other colors around it. And even erasing it is not going to pull it out, and you're going to end up damaging the tooth. So I'm hopeful that provides you enough kind of information to get started if you haven't explored colored pencil before. And I've talked about a number of different colored pencils. I don't want you to feel that you need to go out and buy a set. And I think I've mentioned this in a previous podcast episode. I really enjoy just going into a restaurant where they give those kids 6 pencil or 6 crayon set, the Crayola crayons, and a menu sheet, and you can just draw with that. Honestly, just playing with colored pencils, colored crayons is just fantastic. So if you can, go out and buy yourself some colored pencils or pencil crayons. Start with that. Get some get some good paper. Like make sure the paper is decent. You don't want to get that Crayola paper that is brown and really thin in weight. You want to get something that has a bit of strength through it, because you can use that for colored pencil, for graphite, whatever you choose. As homework this week, that's what I want you to explore. I want you to explore that idea of working with colored pencil. Start with something simple. Draw a strawberry, draw a grape, draw a fly. What you want to try and do is understand the effect of one color on the other. So have those colors interact with one another and see what you can do, see what you can work with. And I would encourage you to try this with a series of different textures, different colors, keeping in mind that you've got light that's coming into this experience as well, whether it's a grape sitting on a table or a dragonfly that's looking at you as the sun's reflecting off its eyes, and applying those colors in a way that where they're not independent, they're working on the colors beside one another. You can share it on Instagram if you choose to. If you tag me, you can share it with me directly. I'm fine with that. I'll provide feedback if that's what you're looking for. I'm also wondering, what colored pencils have you tried before? Do you have a preferred paper that you use? If you do, let me know. I would be interested in seeing what kind of success you've had. So I have some exciting shows coming up. I have a few guests lined up that I think you'll be quite excited to hear from. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss anything, and you'll be notified as new episodes come out. So I'm always looking for guests. If you're an artist, if you're into drawing, digital, let me know. If you or someone you know has a story about their art, drawing, inspiration, please reach out. Your story may inspire someone else. So I do encourage you to let me know if you'd like to come on to the show and talk about what you do. So where can you find me online? MikeHenley.com. You can reach me through there. There's a contact form. The show notes, including links to everything discussed in the episode, can be found at drawinginspiration.fm. I'm on Instagram as Mike_Henley. That is probably the best way to find me. I post all my work's in progress. I will also be doing some more live draws in the future. And so if you follow me on Instagram, you'll be notified next time I go live. I'm on Twitter as Mike Hendley with no spaces, MikeHendley. And I've modified the hashtag because someone else has started using it. So let's use the hashtag DIFM podcast. So Drawing Inspiration FM podcast. So that's hashtag DIFM podcast. You can also just tag me as Mike_Henley on Instagram, and that's a way for me to find the work that you're doing as well. So that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and keep drawing. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want a really easy way to support the podcast, why don't you head over to iTunes and leave a quick rating or even a review? It really helps other people to discover the show, so your support is very much appreciated. Theme music for this podcast is Acid Jazz, provided by Kevin MacLeod.